Hello and welcome back to Dorm Room Diplomacy. I'm your host, Matthew, and I am joined here, as usual, by my good friend, Mr. Jack Arnold.
Hello, hello.
How are you on this fine and absolutely freezing Sunday afternoon?
It is it is freezing. That's all I can say. It has been absolutely miserable this past week in terms of weather.
Yeah, it's
And I
bad.
normally don't complain about that. I really don't. I normally will be the person to make fun of others for not being able to handle the cold, and I have
Suck it up and get over it.
it has genuinely been bothering me this week as well.
Yeah, it's
So,
pretty bad. It's miserable. I've never, lived in a place where you just kind of expect snow to stay around.
mhm.
Um, and it's it's pretty. Like, let's be real here. It's kind of nice,
Sure,
but
sure, yeah.
it also means that it's constantly below freezing, and
It's right.
that's cold. But no, this
Yeah.
week we're supposed to get some bad cold.
I need to look at the forecast because I've been doing so good. Even last week. Last week, miserably cold. And I was able to keep doing my walks after class
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
around the city because it was cold. But if you're dressed properly and it's not
Right.
super windy, it's not that bad. I just
Mm-hmm.
am hoping it doesn't get below the point where I can no longer do that.
So I was gonna say I saw a video, or I hadn't watched
Mm,
it. I haven't watched it yet, but I saw a
okay.
video that I'm gonna watch after the episode, after we record the episode. But
Yeah.
I thought the idea was really cool.
Hmm.
So it's this guy that's kind of on this, health mission journey style thing, and one of the videos he posted was walking across a city, and
Hmm.
of course, in this example, it was Tokyo, but like walking 25 kilometers or 30 kilometers across the city.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, that's a really sick idea. We should try that at some point. And I thought that could be, just something really cool. And maybe it's honestly like a cool idea if you're trying to do like a health outing or something. I don't know. Like you
Yeah.
you just kind of walk across, you set an itinerary, you see all the cool things in your city, but your goal is to go from, south to north, or to go from, east to west of the city, and try and make a
Yeah.
like a big, somewhat overarching walk through the majority of the city bounds if you can. I just thought it would be kind of an interesting concept.
I have done that about
Yeah.
two times. It's awesome. I'm a little bit of a psychopath for how much I enjoy walking,
Yeah.
and it wasn't exactly like you're describing. That would be
Right.
really fun.
It would be
Just to,
fun, wouldn't it?
but like there have been not often, but there have been a couple occasions where I have not like it was a goal or anything. You don't set this goal where we're
Right.
gonna
Right.
walk throughout the whole city or whatever, whatever it ends up being. But there have been a couple times since living in lovely Chicago where just it kind of just happened
Mhm. Mhm.
as we went along and ended up walking about 25 miles
Right. Right.
on two different occasions. And it's just I think people don't realize if you don't live in a really walkable city or area, you just could never imagine doing that. And I
Right.
totally agree. Like it doesn't make any sense. But when it is so easy to just go and walk, and not only like can you walk, but it's interesting to do that as well,
Right. Right. Right.
just makes it so easy to, if you're having good conversation or enjoying, having a good time, it just
Yeah.
becomes so easy to just walk and walk and walk.
I feel like Chicago as a city is a fairly walkable city.
Hmm.
It seems that way, at least by what my one experience there
Yeah.
was. I
Yeah.
mean,
We
we
did a
spent
bunch of
we spent
walking
the
when we
majority of
came
the time
down.
walking, and
Yeah.
it was just when I saw that video title, I was like, oh, this is
Yeah.
genius. This is like actually
Yeah.
genius.
Yeah. It
And,
just
and like I
combines
said,
a bunch of different things.
if you take half a second to like plan out a couple places on your route, or like something's interesting on your way,
Hmm.
it'd be really cool. But I don't know. It was something I found as just a really like stupidly basic topic, right? Like
Yeah.
stupidly like duh, that's a really cool idea, but I'd never thought of it before
I
as
don't think
like
I
an
don't think
actual
everyone would think
concept.
that's a super cool idea.
Well, I mean, like I think that I don't know,
I would
people who like to
imagine
walk
that.
around think it's a
Sure,
pretty cool
yes,
idea.
I agree, but I also think for anyone who doesn't think they like walking that much, if you went with a good friend of yours or someone you really enjoy talking to
Yeah,
and
exactly.
didn't really make it a goal, I promise you could just walk and walk and walk. Especially if it's like a
Right.
city you've never been in, like that just I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but I don't know. I love to walk. I don't know what I don't get what it is. It
Here's an
doesn't get
interesting
old.
here's an interesting thing to put through the noggin. Like in the case of that video, I'm sure there was a cameraman to talk to or whatever, but you know,
Yeah.
speaking for just like directly the video itself,
Hmm.
it kind of would be a little bit odd considering that friend is the face of a camera body.
Right.
A
It's
little bit
yeah.
different in sorts, just in the
And that I
context of
would
that
not
video.
enjoy as much because then it's
Right,
turning it
right.
into something where you're making a production out of it.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
I mean, even if you're by yourself listening to music, listening to a podcast, or it can just be good time to think and reflect. And you're getting
Yeah,
good exercise, you're out, you're
yeah,
seeing new things, experiencing the world. Like, yeah, it's walking, right? It's just a very simple thing.
right,
But at the end of the day, it becomes a lot more complicated if you really think about it.
right. And if you get a good weather day, I mean, can't beat it, right?
Agreed. And yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've really enjoyed recently and just kind of since moving and being in a more walkable
Mm-hmm.
city
Right.
is throughout the week, and not every day, I won't claim that, but mostly when I have class downtown, going for
Right,
a
right.
walk after class I've just put it into my routine. And it's been the time where obviously I walk. It's a little exercise. That's a
Mm-hmm.
pretty immediate thing. That's a obvious positive. But also that's kind of when I try and call people. I'll call you. I'll call parents, other people, old friends,
Right, right.
whatever. And it's just a good time where it's like, okay, just got done with class. I can kind of, if I need to de-stress, if I had,
Right,
anything
exactly.
difficult going on, or if not, it's just time to unwind from the day. And then also, talk to people, have that, conversation, and then just kind of be switching. And then, afterwards being able to sit down and get some good work done.
And like, it's odd, and of course, walking in cities is not the topic for this episode. But at
It's
the
not.
same
It's
time,
believe it or not.
I think that, it carries an interesting parallel to like, you know, there's like meditation, there's like all these different uh
Mm-hmm.
techniques for de-stressing, techniques for,
Yeah.
putting yourself in a mental frame of, I don't
Right.
know, calmness, stability. There's tons of these different techniques that people use, and
Yeah. Absolutely.
whether you believe in its, authenticity or not, that's a you decision to make. But
Yeah.
I,
I
I
mean,
I feel it's genuinely hard to make the argument that if you're walking around just kind of enjoying the moment and using it as
mm-hmm.
possibly an element in your life, like a
Right.
scheduled, regimented element in your life to intentionally step back and walk
Yeah.
away from your issues, literally walk away from your issues, literally
Oh.
and figuratively walk away from your
Wow.
issues.
Yeah.
um
Yeah,
then
I agree.
it does act as the sort of same sort of, it has the same qualities as possibly like meditation and other techniques such as those, just completely different.
Yeah. I think about it like a palate cleanser almost. That's kind of
Right.
what's helpful for me is especially kind of, just to, break it down a little more. I don't want to get into my routine because no one cares about that and it's boring. But on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I have class kind of in
Right.
downtown. and I have class from, let's say, like 11 to 2:30 ish. And right after class, it's on those days that I like to get most of my work done, most of my schoolwork. On those days, it just is easier for me scheduling wise, but it does not work for me to get done with class, take like just a little break, even if I like go get some food and then just start working. It just really doesn't work. I don't have the same motivation. It's difficult for me to focus, and so going and taking a walk right after class is almost like a bit of a palate cleanser for me.
Right.
If you want to use an analogy for it, if you just get done with a heavy dish and you're trying to move on and taste something different, something with a more unique flavor profile, and you don't have a bit of a palate cleanser, it really kind of ruins the experience, and you can't appreciate both of the different things for what they are.
Absolutely,
or you can't be as efficient at both of them, whatever it comes down to.
And like, I want to kind of say, we discussed this concept of how we feel like it perhaps, revitalizes your, mental fog or whatever you may call it. But I also, I don't know how you feel about this. This is more of a person to person thing, but I almost feel like there's this kind of byproduct of going, I don't know, walking or any sort of like, I think walking is the best way to put it, getting away physically from whatever you're doing.
Right.
That not only does what I said it does, but also in our conversations that we have on the phone or, if you're just walking on your own, I feel like there's almost this quality of not just that maybe you're intentionally pushing off what you're working on, but somehow it inherently creates an environment where you're more allowed to think freely and more allowed to, like, I don't know, communicate with your more, I don't know, inner complex thoughts. I don't know how to, describe this. That's a bullshit way.
I agree with what you're saying. I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to describe, so I don't.
It is
hard
to describe.
You for that. But it could be as easy as a change of environment if you're constantly working. It is very simple to take a 30-minute walk or something, or an hour walk, and simply detach yourself from an environment that you associate with, work, school,
right.
So, various obligations you may have, and kind of detach yourself from that and just, let your thoughts flow. Right. That is constantly the theme of all of the, meditation, walking, all of these activities. The constant theme is, kind of sitting back or slowing down and thinking, because there is a significant value to that.
And here's the other weird one that I feel, and you'll have to talk about it if you feel this way. But whenever I'm, say, given this hypothetical situation, which has happened, obviously, I'm speaking from experience, but I'm sitting here in this chair, or in any chair for that matter, whatever it may be, right? Sitting down, just talking to someone on the phone, right? I genuinely feel less focused and interested in the conversation sitting here than I do walking around and talking about the same conversation, the same focus. And I feel like it directly affects my input, my involvedness in my my discussion in the conversation itself. What I'm actually providing to the discussion is directly impacted by this weird, absolutely illogical physical attribute of walking versus not walking. And I don't know if it's characteristic of just, I don't know, higher, muscle usage, higher blood pressure, higher heart rate. I don't know. There's all these different medical factors that could be playing a role in it. And then there's the other factors of, like, your body is doing something that it's just doing second naturedly, but it's also providing you that stimulation that allows your mind to focus. I don't know. There's tons of different theories that could go into this. I think there's
probably, well, no, not probably. I know there's scientific evidence to support it. I don't know what it is, unfortunately.
Right.
That's research I need to do. I, agree with you off of anecdotal evidence, and I do it because of that evidence.
Right.
But yeah, no, we need to take the podcast on the road. We got to start walking,
Right. Right.
walk and
It is
record. If
weird.
it wasn't such a detriment to the audio quality,
Right. Right. It genuinely, one of the things that it heightens the most is just focus, like the direct
yeah, no, I
value of
agree. I
focus.
agree.
And I find it so weird.
It
Like,
is strange.
why?
I want to
Why?
look into the literature just to see because there's got to be reasons, and I always enjoy figuring out something that I do or for whatever the reason, but trying to figure out kind of the evidence behind that so that not
Right.
only
Right.
can I be like affirm my own decisions, but if I'm trying to explain this to someone, I can
Uh huh.
actually provide some concrete evidence.
And we had talked prior to the episode about what we actually wanted to talk about, and I find it odd that this somehow draws a parallel to what we wanted to talk about when it comes to like the focus part of it.
It
Because we
does.
wanted
It
to talk
does.
about talking, which
Yeah. Talking.
is weird.
Wow.
Conversation, speech, so on and so forth. But
Yes.
I find it, odd that like one of the okay, so like you've taken a speech class, I'm sure. I've taken like 2 or 3 speech classes, and
Hmm.
they always give you techniques on how to seem more natural.
Yeah.
Okay. And some of the techniques come back to like not fidgeting, acting like, being pretty still, but not too still because
Hmm.
you don't want to look like a zombie, so on and so
Hmm.
forth. These
Yeah.
fundamental characteristics of what you see good speakers doing. And now how do you arbitrarily define good speakers? I don't know. But,
Hmm.
when it comes to their movements, how do you define that? It's hard.
Right.
Obviously what they're saying, yes, you can define that very, very objectively,
Hmm.
but how they're moving isn't really looked that much. But you
Right.
see a lot of speakers on like TED Talks or, the TEDx Talks or whatever it may be. They're just walking around on a stage talking to people. And I
Yeah.
don't want to sound like, oh, this whole conversation was planned. But like at the same time, somehow it seems to draw a parallel that's kind of, it seems to be very, very close. That
Yeah. Well, I
maybe
mean,
it,
there's a certain interconnectedness to it all, but
right.
I agree with you. I will say, it's funny that you mentioned that because I'm currently in a public speaking class, and I mean, it's quite interesting. I'll say that. Maybe we get into that more later, but we
Right.
were going over TED Talks just because they're
Mm-hmm.
a
Mm-hmm.
rather unique form of media presentation. Your most common, forms of public speaking are going to be, your literal speeches. Literally, you have someone at a podium talking
Right.
to an audience. Everyone can think of that. You also have like a board meeting or a presentation. If you're giving a presentation in class or to, the board of your company, there's various applications of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something that a lot of people think about as well. And just those kind of being the obvious modes of public speaking, if you will. But then you have your TED Talks, and it's kind of it's become a widely, or yeah, just a widely popular form of media.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people love to listen to TED Talks, myself included. And it's a little bit interesting and unique in their presentation because it seems very personal. It's, you feel like you can relate to the speaker a lot because it's
Yeah.
just them walking around on a stage with, some images up in the background that they're referencing.
Right.
And
Right.
it's funny because we were looking at the production of TED Talks, and it turns out that all along the bottom row in front of the audience, there's like little, there's a buffer between the audience and the stage, and there's like a line of plants. And under the plants is just bands of teleprompters. And
Yeah.
then they have someone in the back pacing themselves on the teleprompter while the person's speaking. And so a little unfortunate, but that's
Right.
kind of how it always goes.
Right.
Everything
Right.
you're seeing televised, certainly televised live, but if it has a live audience like the TED Talks do, unfortunately, there is still a level of production to it that
Mm.
removes a bit of the personability, but
Right.
at the end of the day, it only matters how it's perceived, right?
exactly. And I think
You
I was
wouldn't
more
be able to
speaking
tell.
from it. Yeah, exactly. And I was more speaking to it from the more surface level.
No. I'm not. Yeah, no, I'm not trying to say that to be like, oh no,
Yeah, no,
tectonic.
no,
No,
no, no,
yeah,
no.
I agree
And
with you.
like
I agree with you.
half the time, it wouldn't surprise me if like prior when they're doing their dry rehearsal, right, and they're
Hmm.
just like, you take 6 paces that way, you take 4 paces that way, you
I
take
doubt
eight
it. I
paces the next
doubt.
direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, like that's
Sure,
probably not what
maybe.
happens, but I'm sure that there are some individuals
Yeah.
like who go
I would
on stage
imagine.
and that gives them peace of mind. They say,
True.
I'm going to walk 6 paces that way, I'm going to walk 4 paces this way. And
Yeah.
it's the routine itself that gives them
Hmm.
peace of mind. And that goes down back into like fear of public speaking. I don't know. There's a word for it. There's a word for a fear of
It's
everything in the world, but what do you know
yeah.
it?
I I I should. I should. It's. I don't know. I want to say it's like fa. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm gonna butcher it, so I'm not gonna
Yeah.
say it.
But anyway, there's a word for it. We're of course not experts on it.
Now it's
However,
making me mad.
oh Lord, we're gonna pick out the notebook.
Hey, give me a second. Give me a second.
It's a testament perhaps on the way that people, lots of different people,
Yeah.
adapt and work through perhaps their fear or not fear of public speaking, right? Some people just have the ability to go up on a stage and not be afraid. I think to
Yeah.
some level,
It.
if something's important, everyone has a fear. I don't know. I could be wrong. But
I
like,
agree. I think it's very different for different people. Also, I
right.
couldn't find the definition. I'm a little upset about that one.
Oops.
Someone can Google it. It's not that complicated.
No, it's not.
But anyways, I think it's very different for everyone, and I think it's interesting to see how different people react to public speaking,
Mm-hmm.
because it's. I think what you said is certainly true. If anything's important enough, it will be. Even if you're not afraid of it, you'll be
Right, right.
apprehensive.
Mm-hmm.
Just such a seriousness will kind of demand a certain level of stress, I guess.
Right, right.
But it's interesting because a good friend of mine is a pre-law student, and they're a part of a mock trial team here at school. And so they put on, basically, you know, court cases,
Right,
and they
right.
all play certain parts. And it's a very serious, professionally oriented club for people that are on pre-law tracks. But
Right.
I was talking to them, and they have a pretty severe level, like fear of public speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And, I asked kind of the obvious question, isn't that a lot of what you're doing, both in mock trial, but also once you are going to law school and trying to apply this professionally? That's a serious part of the job.
Right.
And what I found interesting is they're like, no, it's very different, because during mock trial in this instance, but also moving forward, I'm able to put myself in a different character.
I hoped you were going to go
And
this direction because I
yeah,
wanted
yeah,
to
yeah.
talk about this.
And so it's very interesting because they had to give a speech for a class, and it was this mortifying moment, and just
Right.
very, very scared, because they had to go up and give a speech about some, mundane topic, and just
Mm-hmm.
talk as themselves. And that was a serious, like, fear of theirs, like, genuinely. And not to say
Right.
that a fear of public speaking is a bad thing. I think it is one of the most common fears
It
on
is.
this planet. And like,
It
that
absolutely is.
is, yeah, that is understandable. It's not something that is easy. But what I found so interesting is every time that this person would have to present in court, whatever it is that they're doing, whether they're, presenting their case as an attorney, or, offering evidence as a witness, like anything, all of the different characters, they're able to, in their head, kind of piece it apart and make it where it's a different experience almost. And you're,
Right.
instead of talking as yourself, which is like, okay, you're still talking, how's it any different? But there's a mental association with quite literally a different person. And even though
Right.
you're still doing the talking, just having, that different mental association is something
Makes all
that
the
for
difference.
them allows them to be much more comfortable with speaking. And
Right.
so I found it very interesting to kind of talk through that.
For sure. And like, I mean, I don't have that particular technique to prevent fear of public speaking, and perhaps we shouldn't address it. I think for some, it is a fear, and for some, like you said, it's a stress regarding the context of the importance of a situation.
Right.
And I think those are two not dissimilar, but separate things.
Right.
Where one is an attribute and the other is a contextual situation-based thing.
Yeah.
But me personally, I've never had a fear of public speaking. I've had nerves in the situation where something is of grand importance, right?
Yeah.
There's a difference. And I don't employ that technique as, the way I go about something. And I understand why people do. And it's a great technique. If it works and ultimately, I think what we come down to in a conversation about a fear of public speaking, of course, that's not what we want to talk about the whole episode, but when it comes down to the fear of public speaking, it doesn't matter how you get over it. Doesn't matter what you're doing to get over it. It matters whether you're outwardly presenting yourself in the way that you want to be viewed.
Right.
Like if you are going up on stage and presenting yourself in, a professional way, and you are okay with the way you're presenting yourself, then you've done nothing wrong, right? Like,
yeah.
If you, and of course you're adhering to the context to the rules of society, right? Like, don't go up and do something stupid. But, if you're okay with it, then great. You're meeting your own standards, whatever, right? But otherwise, like,
I'm caught on adhering to the rules of society. I'm sorry, that sentence just sent me.
Well, I mean,
what does that even mean? What does that even mean?
There have been
I understand.
Instances.
That's I think what happened there is you trying to be politically correct and saying
that's exactly what happened.
Don't go up to stage and be a moron.
Right.
Which, like, sure, I can understand that, but
it was more of a.
I don't know why that sent me.
Right. Like, I'm not okay. What I'm not saying is, don't go up on stage and don't argue for the points you believe in if they are socially possibly not well accepted, right? If they're not accepted by all, don't just ignore it, is what I'm saying. And now we're getting into a basic, political speaking discussion. But like,
no, just here.
Be normal.
Well, this can be revised.
Yeah.
Just if whatever your goal is, however you want to be perceived, then you can honestly use this as a technique similar to using a different persona.
Right.
But if you think of your speech, if you think of speaking as kind of a flow chart towards a goal, whatever that goal is, even if your goal is to look like a moron or say something wildly controversial, then should that goal be accomplished, great, you have done what you set out to do. I think I don't know.
I was trying to say something to protect the political correctness.
I know what you were saying, and it becomes a game of semantics. But I think that I digress. We can move on from that.
What I was trying to eventually say was there, and I don't use this technique, but I know people possibly. I've used this to reinforce ideas, right? And this is arrogant as hell, but like some people I've seen, and I know this happens, is that like you're afraid, you have this, perhaps imposter syndrome of sorts, and it's pretty much the direct opposite of the inheriting a different persona to not be yourself, right? It's the you got here for a reason, you're on the stage for a reason, you have the credibility, now go speak, right? It's just a different mental game you're playing with. How am I okay with this, right?
So having confidence.
Correct.
Okay.
It's not having confidence inherently.
Being
confident.
Sure.
It's manufactured.
Sure. Even if you're faking it. But also, I would feel that, if that is something, if that is how you affirm yourself when going into a speech or sometime when you need to present yourself publicly, being confident in the fact that you have worked towards such a point, or you have done the preparation necessary for this event.
Right.
I think that in itself is certainly valuable. Obviously, you want to be well prepared. But even if, you need to sort of artificially procure some confidence, whatever gets the job done here.
That was the ultimate goal I was going for. Was
fair enough.
If you're getting there, then that's fine.
Now, this does not apply to everything, kids, all right?
Yes,
I want that to be made clear.
I think everything we say should be taken with a grain of salt.
The ends do not the ends don't justify the means. Yes, that is the saying. Of course. That applies. Actually, no, I'm not even going to say that applies to public speaking, because there is going to be a circumstance where it is just like, a blatant violation of all, moral law. So we're not going to go there. We're going to avoid generalizations, because that is never a smart idea. However, I do think that here, I'll say this in the most politically correct way I can think, because that is just the best way to do things, right, guys? And so if you are able to accomplish what it is you set out to do, then I think that in the context of public speaking, great, you accomplished your goal. And there's no other way around it. I'm not saying your goal was a good goal. But I think we're now we really are playing a game of semantics.
Yeah.
And we're going to move on from that, because now I'm making myself upset. So
Yeah.
I think one thing that I kind of wanted to get into before we move on and do, because I think we'll circle back to the public speaking thing after we kind of lay all this down. And I also want to get into like one-on-one conversations, just speaking with people in general. Kind of communication as a whole is the theme here, if you haven't picked up on that yet. But the first thing to lay out is, I think, the mechanics of speech, which I know you were talking about briefly, where, everyone's taking their speech class, and, you get your teacher who tells you, don't use your filler words, and make sure you're talking slowly, and have a nice pause in between your sentences, watch your tone, like all of these things, right? And it's a very rule-oriented way of looking at speech, as if it's a formula, and, you plug each of these variables into the formula and you get your desired output. And we'll come back to that analogy in a bit, because I think you can apply it, certainly, but it's what I think the most important thing about creating effective communication on like a systematic basis, I guess, like for everyone, but also if you're trying to individually improve how you communicate in a variety of contexts. I think that that's an interesting way to think about it and describe it. But at the end of the day, instead of, creating all these rules, listening to all these rules, most of them are true. Most of them are helpful. But it's never going to do you any good to, while you're in a conversation, think, okay, I need to not say I need to not say so, like, as, or I need to be thinking about how fast I'm talking. No, like that, it's not going to get you anywhere. I apologize if
you're going to sound like a robot. Probably.
Exactly. It's not natural. It's not genuine. And that's not what we're trying to do here. But changing how you think about communication, these things will just come naturally. All of the little rules that you hear from all these teachers, or even the things that we're going to say today, it doesn't, like, none of that matters in direct application. It's changing the way you think about communication, and then everything kind of falls into place. And while I'm not going to claim to be, a perfect speaker or an eloquent communicator, there are certainly parts of these little, like, just the rules, we'll say, the rules of speech, to give it a name. There are still things I certainly need to work on. I'm not going to, sit here and pretend like I don't make half of these mistakes. But it's something where I'm actively trying to think about these things, and I'm not actively thinking about them as I'm speaking, even now, even while recording a podcast. talking into my camera and looking at my computer, I'm not thinking about the filler words that I'm using or all of that, maybe after the fact. But it's something that
I try to
over
ignore it.
time, reflecting and thinking about how it is that you talk and communicate, it's more of a pre and post type of thing. And then that kind of will help to improve the in the moment speech, if you will.
It's reflection is basically what you're
Yeah.
saying. It's reflecting about how you're speaking to improve your speaking. Um,
Wow.
and
I know when you say
here,
it like that, it seems so simple,
right, but it's not.
and it's really not.
Because it takes effort. It takes a lot of
Yeah.
effort.
No, absolutely.
Um, but one of the things that I feel like we can kind of do is divide two different types of speaking up. Because like you had spoken earlier about TED Talks that are
Mhm.
perhaps to an extent scripted. There's a script right in front of you. Um, versus ad lib, non-scripted discussion. They're
Mhm.
both forms of
Yeah.
speaking in a public setting, but they both carry inherently different
Right.
attributes. They're both very, very different in what you're doing, right? And
Mhm.
I think it's kind of it's weird because some people feel better doing one, some people feel better doing the other. Um, I just like to break it down and kind of bring out this idea that like people are different and I perhaps would rather speak in a ad-libbed conversation with Jack through a computer screen. It doesn't scare me at all. But going up in front of, a group of 50 people with a script is a lot more difficult. And I think it comes down to those, like you were saying, being yourself and the remembering your conventions of speech, but still being
Mhm.
genuine.
Sure.
I seem to struggle more with when I have a script in front of me because I need to perfect every enunciation of every word,
Mhm.
right? Or I need to make sure that I'm following these conventions. And since my focus is not on what I'm saying, it's on it's on how I'm saying it, I'm more
Yeah.
nervous. But now I'm not focused on how I'm saying it. I'm speaking naturally, but I'm focused on my thought process and what I'm saying.
Sure.
And
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it's a wildly different comparison to make, but like what you're saying is true, and I think that's why a lot of the most effective communicators, or just a lot of the most profound speeches most people have heard, are stuff that is ad libbed or spoken very genuinely. And while
right,
a lot of it is going to be scripted, I feel that a lot of the most profound and just these great orators that you can think of throughout history, whoever it may be, is something where they're not reading directly off a script. Like that is just
right.
so clearly disingenuous. It's something where you're comfortable with the material you're presenting,
Hmm.
you know the points you want to hit, and then you just kind of create a natural flow between all of those points and create just very genuine, personable communication.
I don't know, this is not the right, probably not the right pronunciation, but there's a word for it. It's extemporaneous conversation. It's like it's where it's
Mm-hmm.
coming from it's like you have topics like you just said, but it's coming from what you're thinking about. And
Yeah.
I this isn't important whatsoever, but I had thought when when we were talking about um scripted versus what you're saying just off
Mm-hmm.
the top of your head, there's this thing that came to my mind. And what it was a lot of people on YouTube and television, whatever, who aren't perhaps like seasoned professional script readers, like your anchors on TV or whatever it may be, who aren't
Mm-hmm.
literally adapted to saying everything perfectly because that's what they've done their whole life.
Mm-hmm.
They oftentimes say that when they're writing scripted content, they can only read the content they write.
Mm.
And it's about what it comes down what it boils down to is it's speaking in your own voice that's really important. And
Right.
what I find really odd, because I've had these experiences. Um, when I go in to write a speech, right? The first draft of the speech that's all mine and it is whatever I've written to begin with because it's in
Yeah.
my own voice, I can read it with lesser issues than if it was edited and perfected by others, where there's perhaps less filler words, things to less things that are more
Sure.
characteristic of the way I talk. It's harder.
Mm-hmm.
You have to actively think about the moments where things were changed and
Yeah.
fix them in your head. And what I got onto this topic, where it came from was what these people on the internet that I'm referencing have said is that it's a lot harder to read sponsor reads than it is to
Mm.
read the context in their own videos, because the
Yeah.
sponsor reads are completely written by someone
Sure.
that's not them.
Yeah, and I
And
think
you
it's always, you can always tell when a sponsor read is written by the creator or written
right,
by the company.
absolutely. And it's so odd, because if you are that content creator and you're aware of it, or you are that person and you're aware of it, you
Mm-hmm.
know that you don't sound like you. Like, you go back and watch the clip, you don't
Yeah.
sound like you, and you're stumbling over your words, or whatever, because you're not
Yeah.
writing it, and it's
It's
weird.
very, yeah, no, it's very true. And I think for anyone who doesn't, necessarily uh, relate to this feeling, just go and type something, okay?
Hmm.
And type not with, you're not trying to type out like you're typing an essay, because that's where you'll notice the biggest difference. If you are writing, let's say, an essay, or, some kind of blog post, or like some kind, like an informative piece of content where it's not like you're speaking it, it's going to be very, very different than if you are writing a speech. If you are writing
Right.
something and you are going to have to say what it is you are writing, you will use very different verbiage and you will structure your sentences differently, because at the end of the day, talking and writing are two very different things, which is why
Hmm.
you see so many people who are phenomenal writers and awful speakers, or amazing speakers and terrible writers. And you would think it's such an obvious translation, right? Words are words. Doesn't matter if you're reading them, writing
Hmm.
them, or speaking them. And it's like, simply not true. I wish it
Right.
were. It's simply not, because it's just, there are obviously there's the common thread, but there are very distinct differences between all forms of
Right.
presenting words. And so what you're saying is absolutely true. It changes it drastically, because only you know how it is you speak and present yourself. And so being able to orient yourself while writing a script, for example, will benefit you greatly.
I think, like, if you go, like, when I go and write I don't know, an assignment for a class that is only to be read in your head, or I'm writing a professional essay about something, I
Yeah.
write that in a completely different mental voice than I would
Yes.
write a speech.
Right.
And the techniques I use when I write a speech is I write it as if I was saying it out loud naturally.
Yeah. Right.
That has helped me so much in
Yeah.
writing comparable pieces of spoken word, that I'm able to easily go back and read and speak out to an audience. It's
Yeah.
just a level of
It makes a big
comfortability with
difference.
the topic that you're on, plus a level of comfortability with your own natural speaking patterns. And I didn't think we were going to get this directly into how that works, but honestly, if you take a moment, step back, and think about this, you'll definitely see it, because
Yeah.
I feel like everyone has this thing. Everyone has this characteristic. And what you might be able to do is, go write a short, half a page speech, and then go read a famous speech from the modern era that doesn't have different colloquialisms and different wording, but read one from the modern era. And I guarantee you'll, if you're not a seasoned script reader or a seasoned, professional reader, you will struggle with the professional speech more
Yeah.
than you'll
But
struggle
I
with your
think
own words.
also that is absolutely true. But I think it's very important just to realize that spoken words, if it is like a speech, even in a very serious setting, a very serious academic setting or professional setting, something where you think you would want to be as, oh, I don't know, as technical and as professional, come across as knowledgeable as you possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, someone who is good at speaking, let's use the example of like a project pitch, and you're pitching a product. You're pitching a new product to the board of your company, and you put together a presentation, and you need to pitch to them why your company should pivot into producing this product. And if you were to write an essay, let's say, going over why this product would benefit the company greatly, that essay should and will sound very, very different from if you were to, like you said, write a speech, but in your head you're thinking, I am going to be saying this. Because if you read a lot of the greatest speeches of all time, you're going to look, and if you're reading through it, it is not going to make grammatical sense. It is not something, you cannot capture certain bravado and certain, helpful literary techniques. A lot of these things don't make sense grammatically. They're not going to look good in an essay, but in the context of speech, they are very helpful. And I think the big ones to think about is just like repetition, repeating words or saying a sentence over again, or using kind of a tone curve where you're expressing different words differently. That can be very helpful as well. Or short sentences, or like lists of words. And it's just something that you need to just look at these two things as, yes, are they connected? Absolutely. But two very distinct ways of expression.
And it again, when it comes to public speaking, one of the most absolutely paramount important thing about your speech is, does it command the audience's attention? Does it command the people
I think
you're
at the end of the day,
attention?
it's the most important thing.
It probably is. And I could be wrong, but I would venture a guess that in the majority of cases, the speeches that command the most attention are not only genuine, but are written in the voice of the author themselves. And
absolutely,
in my head, when I'm typing those essays, like I said, I don't have a voice talking to me in my head. When I'm writing speeches, it's literally a voice in my head.
The voices, they told me to say this.
Right, exactly.
Fun fact, Matthew is in fact schizophrenic, so
maybe.
That.
I don't know. That's a
no,
conversation
I know,
I really want to have.
Well, what, that you're schizophrenic?
No. Inner dialogue. Inner dialogues. Okay. But that's not the topic for today.
Yes, I agree. What you're saying is true. I am only giving you a hard time. I do, though, want to pivot a little bit away from public speaking.
Yes.
And talk. Okay, wonderful. The same brain cell. Right. I wanted to take a brief tangent over to a concept that I have actually been thinking about a decent amount recently, and I don't really know why, but I came across it. From last episode, I mentioned I've been doing some reading of philosophy, which sounds boring and actually is pretty boring, but I still find it interesting. So, here we are. And there is a lovely little philosopher that perhaps some of you have heard of, and his name is Aristotle. And he formed many of the most significant conventions of modern thought and philosophy. But, and I don't agree with everything he says. Obviously, it is difficult to agree with everything anyone says.
Right.
But one thing that he was very prominently known for saying, and I mean, he is known as the kind of the father of rhetoric, and was just kind of the best orator of his time. And he spoke, the people listened, and many of the common, conventions of speech, even those rules of speech that we were talking about, are derived from a lot of his theories. And kind of the big one that I wanted to talk about briefly was the idea that all speech is persuasion, or all communication is aimed to persuade. And what does this mean? And so I think when you hear that, when I heard that for the first time, you think, okay, persuasion, that means anytime you're talking, if I'm saying all communication is persuasion, that means anytime I'm talking, I'm attempting to persuade. That sounds very manipulative. That sounds quite deceitful. And I would agree with you. It is, or it sounds that way. But I think it's important to kind of detach this persuasion instead of thinking of it as I am trying to get something from someone, or I'm trying to get someone to do something. These are obvious, things you think about when you think of persuasion. But I think instead, for at least the sake of this conversation, to explore the concept in its entirety, let's think of persuasion instead of speaking consciously with a goal. Okay, there is a goal, and you are communicating as a means to reach that goal. And so there's a couple of different examples, and it's kind of funny. I actually have to give a speech on this topic tomorrow, which is why we're kind of having this conversation, because as responsible podcasters, we came up for the
how
topic.
Convenient.
The topic for this podcast like a few hours ago, and we're recording it now. And I was like, oh, well, I've been writing this speech today. Let's talk about communication. And a major tenet of this speech is the idea that all speech is persuasion. And there's a couple examples just to kind of break apart the nuance here. And so the first one would be if I were, let's say, a car salesman, and I am trying to sell you, Matthew, a brand new car. You come in all innocent and gullible. You're just looking to put a payment down on a car, and I'm trying to get that beautiful commission. In this context, my speech is quite obviously aimed at persuading you to purchase a car. I think that is clear and obvious to everyone. And in that same vein, that could be perceived as quite manipulative or quite deceitful. Certainly, if I twist the truth or omit portions of the truth as a way to get you to purchase this car, I think in that context, it's obvious that it is maliciously intended, I guess. And so that, I think, is where a lot of people's minds jump to first when you say that all communication is persuasion. But there is perhaps another example that we can use where if you and me are going to get coffee, we're having a nice lunch at a coffee shop, and we're just having a good conversation. And we're talking about the weather, how classes have gone, and there's just, some a lighthearted banter going back and forth, and we're simply talking to one another as friends, and you wouldn't think anything of it. Certainly we aren't thinking anything of it. An outside observer would, I would imagine their only thought would be, oh, two friends having a conversation. Nothing significant happening there. But I think for the whole purpose of this thought experiment, and this is a kind of a long twisted way to arrive at our conclusion, but think of my goal in that conversation as it could be certainly many different things, but a few of the possibilities would be me just wanting, my goal could simply be to have a good conversation. That's a goal in itself. My goal could be to persuade. Remember not to think of the word as deceitful or loaded with intention, I guess. Bad intention, that being. But my goal could simply be to persuade Matthew that I am a good friend. And I'm not thinking about it in the moment. I'm not thinking that by asking him how his day was and listening to him talk about his day, that I'm trying to convince him to be my friend. Like, no, that's gamifying something as simple as talking to a friend, and that's not the goal here. The goal instead is to work on, let's say, your economy of words, okay? Making your use of words efficient and effective. And so I think not thinking about this persuasion, like I've said it again and again, it's not something to be thought of as, oh, okay, I have a goal in mind, and I'm going to talk and use words that accomplish this goal. Like, sure, yes, that is like the example I used, but don't think of it as something where every goal is, loaded with this deceit, or you're trying to,
Right,
fool
right.
someone or be superficial. Like,
Hmm.
it's, I think this continues to become a problem in today's age, certainly just with the prevalence of digital communication and how often we're communicating over text, via
Right.
email, social media. A lot of people don't feel accountable for what it is they're saying, and
Hmm.
it places less importance on this, let's say, economy of words, if you will. And
For
so
sure.
at the end of the day, what I think it comes down to is just being very conscious and very, very intentful with the words you choose to use, because you may not think they have that much impact, but everything you're saying or everything you're not saying, like, people pick up on these things, and
Hmm.
most people can read into social situations better than you might imagine.
Hmm.
And so being very intentful with how it is that you speak will significantly set you apart from everyone else that's communicating. Like, I don't, it's not thought about enough. And so many
Right.
people will just go through the motions with this type of stuff. And like I said before, all accountability at this point has been lost. People don't care
Right.
what they say. They think they can say
Right.
anything and not have to deal with any of the consequences.
Hmm.
But I think this, it all comes down to just an awareness of the self and being very just conscious of what it is you're saying, how it is you're saying it. The how, honestly, is more important. I mean, at the
Hmm.
end of the day, you can have the greatest speech, you can choose the most beautiful words, and if you present it terribly, it's all lost and doesn't
Hmm.
really matter in the end.
And
So,
I think that, this was the first time that, just as the audience is listening to you talk about this is also probably one of the first times I've thought about this in this context. And I formulated somewhat of a response to that. I agree
mhm,
with you in the overarching concept that all conversation is persuasive with your same, you know, restriction on intent, right?
mhm,
If you think about it differently, like you said.
yeah,
Um, and it brings me back to this concept of the perhaps agents of socialization. Um, and while we think of persuasion in the way you described it, we understand that persuading someone can be quite literally anything.
mhm,
Um, when I'm talking to you or you're talking to me, and like you said, the conversation is seemingly pointless to
mhm,
ourselves and otherwise, whether our goal is, like you said, to just have a good conversation, if that's
yeah,
genuinely and honestly the actual goal, like, in its, I don't know, most purest form, just to have a
mhm,
good conversation,
yeah,
we might not be thinking about that. But
yeah, and it's
sub
not that you're supposed to.
Right, and you're not, because that just defeats the point of having, genuine, nice
Right.
conversation. But what we don't necessarily, when we step back, we understand. But what we don't understand in the moment is that everything that you're saying has
Mhm,
intrinsic negative or positive value given
yeah,
by our past socializations in this world. And your
mhm,
discussion towards us, your words towards me, whatever they may be, and my words back towards you, whatever they may be,
right.
impact that course of socialization in your life. They
Yeah.
intrinsically give you a different, not necessarily a different view, but they provide a view that is context for reinforcing your view or changing your view on something. And I know we bring this out into our hypothetical conversation about nothing, right? We're just talking about how the weather is, right?
Mhm.
While that might not carry value,
Yeah.
if I say that it's absolutely freaking cold, you're going to feel bad for me nonetheless. And I've persuaded you to feel bad for me. Or you don't because
Yeah.
you're
And right.
masochistic. But
Sure. And I think, yes, that is true. And I think it's important to think, though, like, you're not saying that, and in the moment, you're not thinking, oh, I want him to feel sorry for me because it's
yeah,
so cold. It's like, no, this is not necessarily something that occurs in the moment. Like, that's
it's
not
all
what we're
subconscious.
suggesting here. It's all subconscious. And it's something a conclusion you can only arrive to through contemplation, both
Right.
before and after
Right.
conversation. And so just being more aware, I think that's what
And
boils down to.
one of the other parallels I wanted to draw was like, there are speeches, when we talk about in speech class, you have a persuasive speech that is in its most natural sense of it in the context of a speech class. You are trying to reach a goal, like you said.
Yeah.
But conversations like, I don't know, like the State of the Union address, okay, for the United States government, that is not intrinsically to persuade an individual of a given goal, right? Like, I'm not trying to tell you to go do something, right?
Sure, that is true, but I would argue that it is still persuasion.
That's where I'm going.
It
is still
I just
persuasion.
wanted to make sure.
Yes, that's where I'm going. It is still persuasion because
it's different.
What you're saying about this, I don't know, say that for the sake of argument, oil prices are cheaper because of or because of the work that the executive branch has done, or because of the work that whatever the hell it is.
Right.
You are taking that to mind. Oh, that's a benefit for me. I am not paying as much for gasoline, right?
Sure.
Oh, I like this. This administration.
Right. And then,
right
the
there,
goal,
that's subconscious persuasion.
Right. The goal being, for our example of the State of the Union address, painting the administration in a positive light, which is obvious. You think of that, okay, that's obvious, but this really is applied to everything at varying levels of, let's say, genuineness. Like, it is very clear that, for the president giving the State of the Union address, yes, the goal is to paint the administration in a positive light. But I don't want you to think that the same sentiment is applied to our conversation of the weather. Is it still persuasion? Yes, but it really does come down to how you define persuasion there, because there is no, I'm not really trying to, create a persona by saying that it's sunny outside.
Right.
Or, me sympathizing with something you said is not me trying to be like, oh, look at me, I'm such a great friend. I'm persuading you to be my friend. No, it's more so whatever your goal is in the given moment, your speech should align to that goal. And it comes back to the consciousness, the being aware of what you're saying, really the economy of words.
And I want to, right there, I want to take a moment. You said, you used the word speech, and I think that there's a parallel ways of people going and thinking. In the context that he said it, he meant speech as in words rather than speech as in going and giving a speech. And
yes,
there's, of course, it's a conflict of definitions right there. But when I was going back to that, what we were saying before, when I was formulating my response, because I had been thinking about it, I had really had been trying to come up with a genuine response. When I was thinking about it, I know there's better examples than the State of the Union address. I know there is for the purpose of our argument. There are better examples of speeches that don't have the direct goal of persuading. That was just the best one I could come up with at the time.
Yeah, no. You think, it applies really, you could think about all of your favorite TED Talks. It doesn't seem on the surface level that they're, trying to persuade you. Obviously, it depends on the content of what it is. But, if someone's giving a keynote on how AI is improving, I don't know, the agricultural industry, like, what is their goal? Obviously, if they're working in that sector, their goal is to convince you that this emerging technology is beneficial to certainly their sector, but also to the world. And while they may not actively be looking, like, it might not be a direct, like, investment pitch. Most of the TED Talks are supposed to just be educational. There is still a persuasion there, and it can be benevolently intended. It could, they truly could have no negative intentions with it and be only, it could just be purely altruistic, and it still is persuasion. Like, it's important not to think of it only with the negative connotations.
Correct.
So I get that it's, a bit of a loaded word that's, hard to think about it in that context. But I think if you step back and think about it that way,
Mhm.
it can certainly improve how you communicate, but also just
Absolutely.
makes, it can be eye-opening to how
Mhm.
others communicate as well. And then you can
Mhm.
kind of take pieces of that into your own life.
I kind of want to shift directions for a second because
Okay.
when we've been having this conversation, right? I've
Hmm.
been thinking in my head. We've been talking about public speaking more as, like we said, speech as in speech in front of people, right? We've been talking
Yeah.
about it as you are publicly speaking for a goal, right? And
Yeah.
while I think that speaking for a goal applies to pretty much all speech that's professional,
Hmm.
I when I go back and I rewatch this episode and I hear what we're talking about, and throughout the conversation, I've been thinking in the context of going up to a podium and talking in front of a group of people for whatever purpose, right?
Yeah.
But we haven't touched much on what you said briefly, the business conversations, the presentations, the, you know, somewhat little bit intrapersonal conversations. And I
Hmm.
feel like, or not intrapersonal, but the one-on-one conversations, those different things. And I feel like while they carry a lot of the same attributes, they're a little bit
Yeah.
different in nature. And
Yeah. I mean, they are. Obviously, you present yourself differently when pitching to a group of investors than you would
right.
when having a conversation with your best friend. But I
Hmm.
think what's interesting is they're less dissimilar than you might think. There
Right.
is more of a
Exactly.
common thread than you might initially think. And again and again, I'm worried that our message here is going to be misinterpreted to, oh, you need to think about conversation like it's, game
Every moment.
theory and you're
Right.
optimizing every single word and sentence. No, that's not what I'm saying. It's not what Matthew's saying. It's not the goal here. It really, I'm going to say this again and again, but like being effective and efficient with your words. And I mean, I know that sounds like I'm optimizing it, right? Game theory, game theory. No, all of your words have consequences, whether they be positive or negative. And being
Hmm.
aware of the consequences that they have, that, like I said, that economy of words, the
Right.
consciousness, it applies to all communication. I
Hmm.
promise. It really
Hmm.
does. And so it's it's difficult to think about. I know,
Right.
because I have serious difficulty with this, and it's something I try and think about a lot, but it's
Hmm.
very hard, and like I don't know, it's not something that's like easy to think about. Like if I have a conversation, I don't like, sit with myself and like do a post conversation interview
Right. Right.
internally and be like, hey, how do we do? Was
Right.
that good? Was that bad? No, that's not what I'm saying here.
I think that I had come up with this example in my head, and
Okay.
I find it really, really interesting. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to bring up two extraordinarily historically important speeches.
Okay.
One being the obvious John F. Kennedy speech, the famous one that gets put everywhere,
Okay.
and the Martin Luther King speech that's also literally everywhere. If you don't know of
Sure.
these, stop living under a rock. But from them, there are very, very, very influential quotes, and not the quotes themselves are important, but what the emotion they carry themselves is important. Okay, the
Mm-hmm.
words aren't necessarily important, but it's the emotion itself that it carries and how
Yeah.
it's important to other people. Now, I feel like when you were saying they're not too dissimilar, they aren't, because we go to a venture pitch, like a VC pitch, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, how are you going to make that investor feel like either a part of the organization
Right.
or feel like their contribution to this thing is benefiting them or benefiting their
Right.
goals or aligning with their goals? And I bring it back to, I love to watch a lot of Shark Tank clips, right? And I bring it back to all some of the best and well, received pitches on
Yeah.
the show are ones, and now I'm not saying, like, listen, I'm not saying that they're all genuine, okay? I know that things are scripted, but some of the best and well received pitches are the ones that carry either emotional weight, and not emotion in the sappy, whatever the hell way you might think of it as it's
Yeah.
defined, emotion as in genuinely how it makes you
People, yeah, no,
feel.
like people can tell if you're serious about something.
Right, exactly. And same thing about talking to your best friend. The emotion that you have behind your words makes it command attention
Yep.
and command focus.
It's all how you present yourself. I mean, I think I said this earlier in the episode. When talking, your words are not even a third of what's perceived by others. It's your
Right.
body language, it's your tone of voice. There are statistics on this. I knew them at one point, but it is seriously like 70-80% delivery, where a majority of that, like a good 40%, is body language, how you carry yourself. Then then there's tone of voice, how you speak, the flow of your tone, volume, all these things.
Right.
And then it's the actual words, because using, your example of a VC pitch, it doesn't matter if your, company has the most gorgeous balance sheet on the planet of the earth.
Right.
On the planet of the earth. Oh my God. Love that. Love that. On the face of the earth.
Of the earth.
It doesn't matter if you create the most beautiful speech, best words. You have the greatest speechwriter in the world concoct this masterpiece for you. It does not matter if you cannot deliver it. If you're sitting up there, stiff as a board and not moving around, your hands are by your side, and you're talking like this, and last quarter we were able to raise our profits by 20% and our projected revenue. Like, I don't care. No one cares. It's delivery. Does what you say matter? Yes. But it all comes down to delivery. And does this apply to public speaking, all this stuff? Yeah. That's obvious. It also applies to your one-on-one conversations, your small group conversations, everything. People, I promise you, are better at reading social cues than you think. And that is what it comes down to.
I think that you used a word, you used speechwriters, and I that kind of directly contradicts our whole conversation about the authenticity of your own voice. And I think that speechwriters,
right back to what you were saying.
It's poor, right? It's not great, but of course, speechwriters are there not necessarily, in the best sense of the way of doing it, are not necessarily there to change your voice, but rather make your voice more concise.
Yeah, it should be an elevation. It should be taking you from where you are and helping you to be better, not trying to make it seem like you're someone you're not.
Right. And I wanted to draw back to, you said something about how speeches don't make much grammatical sense, right?
It's true. It's true.
And there's the famous JFK quote, we choose to go to the moon and do other things in this decade not because they are easy, but because they are hard. That doesn't necessarily, you don't start a sentence with we, and other things that don't make sense. But that quote has ever lived on in American history because of its emotion and importance.
Because writing and speech are two very different things. And
I think I got the quote right.
Yeah. Or, I have a dream. I have a dream that one day, all of these things. People need to, you got to detach speaking from writing. It's very different. And the common thread is the words. Yes. The English language is quite the nuanced thing. But at the end of the day, it comes down to how you deliver this and being conscious and aware of what it is you're saying and the effects that those words have.
And one of the things I wanted to ask you, okay?
Sure.
In speech classes, you're exposed to 3 overarching concepts of the individual, right? The logos, ethos, pathos conversation, right? Your the 3 characteristics, right?
It's the appeals.
Right. It's the appeals and their importance to your speech. And why I think we've been having a phenomenal conversation about this, but why is anything we're talking about, you know, important? Why do you believe us? And I think that also plays a role into, hey, this person is important. Focus on him versus, it's a ratio, right? You can have any sort of ratio. You can be unimportant and have a phenomenal speech that resonates with hundreds of millions of people, or you can be really, really important and have a speech that also resonates with hundreds of millions of people. Like, again, I feel like when it comes back to what we were saying before, it just kind of comes back to how you are, like you said, your body language, speech. I'm more putting it into context of perhaps the words that have been thrown out in speech class.
Sure. Okay. I was wondering where you were going with that. I'll be honest, I had no idea. But yeah, I agree. I mean, that I think comes down to more of just being effective and efficient with how you communicate.
Right.
You're wanting to appeal to certain aspects of the human psyche. And that comes, that plays into being an effective communicator. That also plays into the persuasive nature of communication in good and bad ways. And so, yeah, no, I agree. All stuff to be aware of. But I think that's a good spot to kind of wrap things up.
Yeah.
Before we introduce new circles to walk around in.
Right. And there's definitely more. There's definitely more.
There always is. We'll never be able to cover it all. But I think that's a good stopping point. Hopefully this is an introduction. We're back after the last episode of housekeeping, to be honest. Hopefully back into the topics that interest us and I would hope interest you guys. That is, after all, the whole goal here. We are trying to persuade you to think that we have important things to say, even if we don't. So whether you think we do or do not, that, it's your own conclusion to make.
It's a lot easier for us to speak into the abyss, right?
Exactly, right? We don't, But hey, reactions are welcome. Any comments, anything you want to say, we do genuinely want to hear. And, all feedback is appreciated. You guys know where to support us. We love the support as always. That is how, we try and grow here and get to say all of our, lovely and stupid things to even more people.
All the words.
Yeah, exactly. It's just the words, right? It's just the words.
Hopefully, if you took anything away from this discussion, it's not just the words.
Exactly. All right, but I think we'll wrap it up there. We will see you all next week.
For sure.
Peace.